Moistening sounds like a scary movie.
Yeah, I know, the moistening.
Like The Happening, we were supposed to believe that Mark Wahlberg was a science teacher. That was the most unbelievable part of that movie. Welcome to episode 2 of BA's Baking School Layer Cake Edition. Today we're focusing on fillings and soaks, those components that are in the interior of the cake. So you see this beautiful layer cake, you slice into it, and there's kind of a surprise inside. If you think you don't need a soak or a filling in your cake, I'm going to show you why actually you do. Why do we need layer cake fillings, and what is a filling? So this is a slice of our white cake with no filling at all. You can see it is cake on cake on cake on cake. It's boring. It's just all one texture, and the amount of cake is just kind of overwhelming. I don't really want to eat this. Let's see how I can get a bite with all 6 layers. That's good cake. I do not like it, but I would much rather have this same cake, but this time with our toasted coconut caramel filling. There's just so much more going on. Even after the cake kind of disappears, you're still kind of chewing on the caramel. So much more interesting. You get lots of textural variation in every bite, all these different flavors. Cake needs this accompaniment. I really like cake, but I don't want to eat this much of it. Each one of our layer cakes has its own distinct filling, so here's what those fillings are. The filling in our birthday cake is whipped milk chocolate ganache. We have 2 layers of it in between the 3 cakes. The reason I like using the whipped milk chocolate ganache is because it's a nice counterpoint to everything else going on in the cake. The filling inside of our coconut cake is a toasted coconut caramel. It has such a great chewy texture, and this is the component that packs a lot of the coconut flavor. The filling in our carrot cake is a vanilla pineapple compote with rum. You can barely even see it because I've spread it in such a thin layer. It's very intense in flavor, and I don't want it to overpower the cake. So even though you can't really see the vanilla pineapple filling, what you are seeing is an extra layer of our classic cream cheese frosting, which you'll see in the next episode. So to make all the fillings, you're gonna need a few tools. Mixing bowls of different sizes, heat-proof, various size saucepans, paring knife and small cutting board, some heat-proof spatulas, small offset spatula, my favorite tool, a whisk, a blender, a hand mixer.
How's that not a blender?
This?
Yeah.
How is this not a blender? It's not a blender. It's a hand mixer. We're making ganache.
Oh, excellent.
Do you know the definition of ganache?
Ganache, no. Why don't you just tell me? Melted chocolate with milk in it or some shit?
This
Butter?
is pretty close. Just cream and chocolate basically in equal weights. We're gonna whip this and have it be a filling for our yellow cake.
Since you're doing cakes, can you do the one where they make the cupcake in the ice cream cone?
Oh my God, I love those. I made those for my birthday when I turned 28.
Yeah, perfect.
It was
Bringing it
20
back.
years after the
How
last
good were
time I
they?
had them. You should make that.
Yeah, and put some ganache in it.
There you go.
So what is ganache again, you said? The definition?
Equal weights, chocolate and heavy cream, melted together.
Equal weights. Okay, that's it.
And then sometimes you add a little butter. It's a great filling because it's soft at room temperature, but it also is whippable. So today we're gonna whip it, and then it sets up a little bit.
Well, whip it good,
firmer.
Claire.
Here are the ingredients that you need to make the milk chocolate ganache. Heavy cream, kosher salt, milk chocolate discs, and unsalted butter. I'm not heating up the ingredients together, I'm only heating the cream. If I did it together, chocolate's very temperature sensitive and I risk scorching it or burning it. Also add my little bit of salt. All right, bringing this over to the stove. So I'm gonna take this off once I start to see little bubbles around the sides. Cream will also boil over. You don't want that to happen. See it's starting to bubble up just a little bit around the edges. Okay, so I'm gonna use the heat from the cream to gently melt the chocolate. And I am going to let this sit for several minutes. Okay, I'm gonna start stirring. I think everything's had a chance to melt. So this will all come together into a beautiful, sort of like semi-liquid mixture with a really glossy, smooth consistency.
It's like chocolate milk.
I love chocolate milk. The mixture is completely smooth, but it's still warm. Only once it's room temperature, I'm gonna incorporate my butter, which is also room temperature. So a good rule of thumb for a lot of pastry kind of preparations is you want things to either be exactly the same temperature or vastly different temperatures. It's important that for these things to incorporate evenly, that they're both thoroughly room temp. The ganache has cooled down a lot. You can see it's starting to thicken a lot. I'm at that stage where I want to whip in the butter. I don't want to put this in a blender or even in a stand mixer. I like the control of a hand mixer so I can really keep an eye on it because there's a very specific endpoint that I want to take this to. I know that I'm done not only when it's a bit thicker, but the surface texture will turn a little bit so that shine will go away and it'll turn matte.
It's quite a dramatic transformation from that very liquidy ganache that we formed in the beginning. So good. So this came together really quickly with very few ingredients. We had our chocolate in a bowl and poured the hot cream over top, let everything sit until the chocolate was melted. I stirred it until smooth and then let everything come up to room temperature. Then I added the butter and whipped it together until it held soft peaks. Okay, now I'm gonna move on to my other two fillings for the white cake and the carrot cake. So the white cake is going to transform into a coconut layer cake, and so for that one we're making a coconut caramel. It's a very, very tight, solid caramel that I make with coconut oil to give it extra coconut flavor. Here are the ingredients you need to make the coconut caramel filling. Granulated sugar, heavy cream, virgin coconut oil, kosher salt, and toasted, finely shredded coconut. Okay, so I have all my ingredients here. I'm going to build the caramel on the stove, and it's a dry caramel, which means I'm cooking just sugar in the pot with no water. So I'm gonna take my heavy cream and sugar over there, and then I'll come back and stir everything else together. Can you define caramel as caramelized sugar? If caramelized comes from the word caramel, I don't think so. So caramel is essentially sugar, cooked to the point where all of the water has been driven off. I'm waiting for the first little bits of sugar to start to melt. So it'll go from white to sort of a clear liquid. Focus right where the end of the spatula is, and it's going to start to go clear. And then I'm going to progressively add more sugar on top of the melted sugar, starting to incorporate. I have a couple layers of sugar in here, and it's melting faster around the sides. So I'm going to start to bring the melted sugar into the middle. You can see it's also taking on a little bit of color. Rhoda, I spilled the heavy cream. Sorry, I didn't use the dish, which I should have used. Sorry. I'll clean it up. I'm still working to dissolve some of the larger pieces of sugar, but it's taking on nice color. I'm gonna take it pretty far in terms of the color because the darker you go, the more you develop some of those bitter notes, which I really like. So it'll add, I think, a lot of complexity. And now I'm gonna kill the heat, slowly add my heavy cream. So there's my caramel. Normally with caramel, I would add butter in addition to my heavy cream. But instead of butter, I'm adding coconut oil. So this is going to give, I think, a really nice coconut flavor to the caramel. And it will also help it solidify at room temp. This will tighten up quite a bit as it cools. I don't want a thin filling because that creates all kinds of issues when you go to construct the final cake.
What would happen if the filling that you made is too thin? I made this batch of caramel a little bit differently, more like a caramel sauce rather than a filling, so it's pretty liquid and a little runny. So we want to see what happens when we use a filling with this consistency in between the layers. Put it on, not a whole lot. I'm spreading it around, not even to the very edge. And now, here's the problem. When more layers go on top and everything compresses, there's some ooze. When you go to frost it, the filling mixes into the frosting, thins out the frosting, makes so that you can't get any coverage around the layers, and it basically turns into a very huge, frustrating mess. So if you think your filling is too thin or you're not sure, don't just plow ahead and hope for the best. You have to kind of course correct and maybe start over with your filling. But if you're going for a naked cake, that could be kind of cool. So it all depends on what you're going for.
All right, this is looking very beautiful. And now I'm ready to add my last ingredient, which is this finely shredded toasted coconut. If I were to add big coconut flakes, then those would get in the way. Again, I want to keep the texture of the fillings pretty fine. Kind of has a Samoa vibe, the Girl Scout cookie. It sets up so solid that it might be necessary for me to rewarm it, but I'd rather have a filling that was solid at room temp rather than liquid. Okay, I should taste it though, right? It's so good. I love the texture of the coconut. It makes it a little bit chewy. I think it's really the perfect kind of balance of salty, sweet, kind of bittersweet. Delicious. So for the coconut caramel, I cooked the sugar in a large saucepan over medium-high heat using the dry caramel method. Then I took it off the heat and stirred in the heavy cream little by little until smooth. Then I brought it back over to the workstation, stirred in kosher salt, followed by virgin coconut oil, a tablespoon at a time. Then I folded in the toasted, finely shredded coconut. Now I'm going to move on to the filling for the carrot cake, which is going to be a pineapple vanilla compote. Some people put crushed pineapple from a can in their carrot cake. I I'm not a fan of that, but I like the idea of incorporating kind of a fresh, acidic fruit element. The compote is basically a very reduced, thick, like cooked fruit mixture and not overly sweet, so it's a really nice sort of bright complement to the cake. Here's what you need to make the vanilla pineapple compote filling. Chopped fresh pineapple, dark rum, a pinch kosher salt, sugar, and the seeds from 1 scraped vanilla bean. I need a pound of chopped pineapple flesh. You know how pineapple has like papillase, the enzyme that breaks down meat? And I've definitely eaten so much pineapple in one sitting that like it feels like it took off the skin on my tongue. Anyway, just slice out the core, which then I like to snack on, even though it's kind of tough. Little fibers. I have a blender here. I'm going to blend everything together so you don't have to make perfect slices and it doesn't really matter how big they are. The reason that we're blending it is because I don't want to put really large pieces of a filling inside the cake, because when you go to slice the cake, it's going to be hard to cut through if I have big pieces of it in between the layers. Spice rum. Alcoholic beverage. Halfway to a pina colada. It's a little frothy now, but the idea is that the whole thing is going to cook down into kind of a thick, almost like apple butter consistency. And I'm not adding sugar yet because it really depends on the sweetness of your pineapple, how much sugar you want to add. Now I'm going to go over to the stove and start to reduce it. Of all the fillings that we're using, this one is definitely the loosest in consistency. We all remember what happens when your filling is a little too thin. So this has to come up, it'll start bubbling and boiling, and then I'll turn it down. The water goes away, everything thickens, the flavors concentrate, the sugars concentrate. I'm gonna skim some of the foam off, which can make the mixture a little bit cloudy. All the foam has come off the surface now, and I'm gonna go ahead and add my sugar and also my vanilla bean. A vanilla bean is it packs a lot of punch. I try not to cut all the way through both sides, but I kind of did. And then use the back of the knife to scrape. These are all the seeds that are going to go in. And I'm also going to add the whole bean because there's still flavor in the pod. You can get great flavor from pure vanilla extract, but there's really no replacement for the seeds, which have just the most incredible like floral vanilla flavor. So sugar, the pod, and the seeds. I love when you can see all the little speckles from the vanilla bean in the mixture. So now I'm just going to let this continue to reduce. I basically want all the water gone. So here is this pineapple mixture that's been fully reduced. You can see that it has kind of the texture of like a thick applesauce, and all of the alcohol in the rum has burned off. So what we have is just sort of a nice like rum essence that's perfuming the mixture. So this looks good. I'm ready to take it off the heat. I'm just going to put some plastic over it and let it cool. For the pineapple vanilla compote, in a blender I combined the pineapple, rum, and a pinch of salt, blended that until completely smooth. Then I transferred it to a medium saucepan and cooked it over high, skimming the foam until reduced. Then I added the seeds from 1 scraped vanilla bean plus the pod and sugar to sweeten and cooked it until thick like apple butter. So here are all the fillings. So even though it's on top of these slices, they are really going to be in between the layers on the final cake. Now we're ready to move on to soaks. Right now I want to illustrate why we use a soak when we build our layer cake. So I have 2 pieces of cake here side by side. This is cake that's a couple days old, so it's dried out quite a bit. We're going to keep 1 slice plain, and 1 slice I'm going to saturate the top with some soak that we have right here. Oh, Emil.
Yes, Claire?
Do you know what a soak is?
I mean, I think
In the context of a layer cake?
No, I don't.
Yeah, you do.
What?
Can you come up with a definition that doesn't use the word in the definition?
To submerge something in a liquid such that it absorbs a certain amount of said liquid?
That's mostly true, although that's not really the submerging part. We more like douse. So anyway.
So it's really more of a douse.
It's more of a
soak.
douse.
Or a drench. You ever call it a drench?
Yeah, but we don't want it to be saturated.
So
We want to lightly moisturize
so
the cake.
The moistening.
The moistening.
Yeah.
You can call it a moisten.
Okay. Moisten.
Don't stop saying moisten. Really, you want to let the soak actually like absorb through the cake, but we don't have time for that, so just carry on. Better.
The moistening. GM.
Thanks, Emil. You can go away now. Fortunately, of all the many components in a layer cake, the soaks are kind of the easiest part to assemble. So I'm going to put together 2 different kinds and show you how. That we're going to use one for the yellow cake, one for the white cake. Here's what you need to make your soaks. It's pretty minimal. A spatula and a small saucepan. Sorry. Here's what you need to make the vanilla milk soak. Whole milk, granulated sugar, vanilla extract, and kosher salt. The process for the soaks couldn't be simpler. I'm just combining all the ingredients and heating it gently until I dissolve the sugar. So again, I'm doing vanilla milk, kind of inspired by like the sweetened milk drinks that are popular with kids. I don't know, is that a thing? Do kids drink sweetened milk? Like strawberry milk was a thing when I was a kid. Strawberry milk, obviously chocolate milk.
Strawberry milk's my favorite.
Vanilla milk is a thing, right?
It's like a Nesquik alternative.
So this is already done. That's it. So this came together really fast. All it was milk, sugar, vanilla, and a pinch of salt brought together so that the sugar dissolved. And now I'm gonna move on to my second soak for the white cake. So here's what you'll need to make the coconut milk soak. 1 can coconut milk, granulated sugar, kosher salt, and vanilla extract. I'm gonna use the opportunity of the soak, which will permeate the layers, to introduce some coconut flavor into the white cake. So it's very similar to the soak for the yellow cake, but using coconut milk instead. Everybody into the pool. So I like the coconut milk for a couple reasons. One, there's a lot of fat in it, so it's adding moisture and richness to the cake. And also because I want a coconut cake to have lots of different kinds of coconut. So we have it in the filling and in the soak, and we're gonna incorporate it into the decorations as well. And we're done. So it has a nice sort of viscosity. This is actually it for the soaks. So we're not gonna do a third soak for the carrot cake because the cake is oil-based. It's already super moist and it just doesn't need it. So to make the coconut milk soak, we combined 1 can of unsweetened coconut milk, vanilla and sugar, and a pinch of kosher salt in a small saucepan. Warmed it over the stove just to dissolve the sugar and then let it cool. So now I'm gonna demo the best technique for applying the soak to the top of the cake. Here's what I'll need to soak the cakes. 1 pastry brush. Okay? So this is a yellow cake from, I don't really know what it's from because frankly there's been so much cake around, I've lost track. But I'm gonna show you kind of the proper technique for soaking a layer. You really only wanna soak layers that are cut. So if I were to try to soak the cake without having trimmed the top like this, the soak will not penetrate as easily into the crumb, and that's what I want. I think the key here is not dragging the brush over the cake because that kind of makes crumbs, so I'm just gonna do a dabbing motion, and I wanna be generous, but really only kind of go once around. The reason I'm only going once around and not re-soaking any areas that I previously soaked is because it's possible to over-soak, which has some pretty negative consequences.
What would happen if you over-soaked a cake layer? So instead of just going around the surface with the brush one time, I'm gonna go over it several times and we'll see what happens. Just like start pouring it all over the whole thing. I should just do that. It's faster. You have to sort of know how many times you've been over because it's not going to stop absorbing once it has enough soak in it. Okay, let's see what happens when I try to lift it up. All right. Okay, the whole thing just comes apart. The soak weakens the sponge and weighs it down, and then you basically get this kind of breaking apart mess, and there's no structural integrity, so you can't stack it or put anything else on top of it. So don't do that. You'd have to obviously add quite a bit of soak to get to that point, but rule of thumb, 1 time across the surface, that's it. And also you can gauge the absorption. A 2-day-old cake could use a little more soak than a fresh cake. It's just wet. I don't like it. Wet sponge cake makes me think of wet sponge, which is gross. Like a dish sponge. Okay, too much soak means you end up with a cake that basically disintegrates. Don't do this.
So hopefully this opened your eyes to the possibilities for soaks when you're making your layer cake. It can be a great opportunity to introduce new flavor and also be a real lifesaver if you accidentally overbake your layers and they're kind of dried out from the start. So we've done our layers, we did soaks and fillings. There's one thing missing, arguably the most important thing, and that's frosting. So keep watching for the next episode when we tackle 3 different kinds of frosting for our 3 layer cakes.